Okay. Right, so that's all sorted. I don't want to apologize, ladies and gentlemen. Hang on, I just turned the volume down. At the very last moment, it wouldn't let me in, and said we're waiting for the host. So everything's all sort of gone all a bit pear-shaped. So, but for those of you who don't know, this is a live stream discussion on Joe Biden's first year as president. With me is my wife Rachel, who will be shortly making an appearance, and our guests include Joshua Bergin, no relation as far as we know, who's a Republican, or albeit of the moderate persuasion, and also we have Warren Morgan, who's a Labour Party activist. So hopefully, all's there. I'm just doing a quick bit of spring cleaning to make sure everything's all set up and ready to go. And I can't do final checks until we're starting to be live stream. So that can be a little bit irritating at the best of times. I do appreciate your patience on this. So thank you very much. Just quickly open up. So we are running a little over 5 minutes, and I do apologize. So hopefully we will get there. I'm just going to make sure this is all set up on Twitter and Facebook.
I just said thanks.
Yeah. So good. Thank you, Rachel. Hopefully, all good. Yes. So let's, without further ado, invite Warren and Joshua. Hang on. Okay. Admit and admit. Hello.
Hello, Paul.
Hi, Warren. Hi, Joshua. Hi, Warren. So sorry about this. There were last-minute technical problems, and everything sort of started to eat into the deadline, as it were. So, but basically, when I went to sign in, it said waiting for host, and that shortly before that, the internet connection in the household just went kaput. So I was having a bit of a race against time, but hopefully all's been well now and all okay. How are you both?
Good, thanks.
Good.
No complaints.
So yes, Biden's first year as president. I think a lot seems to have happened in the first year. And it might be worth us going back over what had happened before. Also, Rachel's joining me. She was a bit busy.
I was trying to keep out of the way whilst the technology was going wrong.
But yeah, it's been a bit of a difficult time. And beforehand, let's not forget we had the January the 6th riots in Capitol Hill, and I think we came across days in American history which will go down in history as perhaps one of the most trying times in US history. now a year has gone by, how do you both look back on those final days of the Trump presidency?
Joshua, what do you think?
Good question. I've been open about my misgivings around Donald Trump from candidate to president. But I find much of the January 6th things to be overblown. If we look at sort of American history, I think Andrew Jackson's his people sort of storming the White House mark a much more existential sort of day for the Republic, not the least which we would have September 11th, Pearl Harbor. There's a lot of overblown hysteria around it. I'm not minimizing. I don't like it. I didn't support those who would go and crash into the Capitol building as an extension of protest. But I'm one of those that don't buy the generalized media narrative around it.
Joshua, can I come back to you on that? Because it did seem to be a genuine threat to democracy. So, and it also, you had the aspect of Trump possibly encouraging it. A general election took place, and there were riots to overturn the result of a democratic election in the world's greatest democracy. That's actually quite scary. Would you not agree?
Without doubt. And I mean, like I said, I'm not advocating or supporting it. I think that it was pretty embarrassing on the global stage, to be sure. But I've also seen headlines that call it an attempted coup. Coups involve military leaders. Coups involve senior officials within the government. And I don't mean the outgoing president. Trump has always been a bit of a carnival barker, gas bag, whatever you want to say. So nothing about this is surprising. What would have caused me deep concern is if there was, half a dozen or a couple dozen generals that were sort of forming a militia or trying to instruct the army in some way or another. This was an out-of-hand protest, rally, whatever you want to call it, that led to people entering the Capitol building. Don't like it, but I also didn't like the Republican, the crew that was storming the Capitol building in Michigan at one point with demonstrating their right to open carry. Or sit-ins with Democratic activists in other states where they go and occupy the Capitol building. These things are poor form. They're not, like, to your point, they don't exercise democracy as we've known it in the US for at least the past 100 years, let's say.
Warren?
I think it's very relevant to the topic of Biden's first term, because I think what it did was delegitimize his election for a significant part of the US electorate. I think it kind of pushed home that belief that the elections weren't free and fair, which obviously every court case, inquiry, findings of state election managers has proved to be entirely without basis. I think it's harmed the US's reputation globally. Obviously, the difference from those early days of storming the White House, and the British burning it down in 1812, was it, and all of those kind of things, is that since the sort of Pearl Harbor days, the US has become the world's policeman, to use a phrase, and I think people look to the US as a kind of successful modern democracy, one that was forged from real principles, democratic principles, and I think those are seriously in question now. So that's kind of the past and the present, but I think the future is the thing that concerns me most, and the midterms obviously coming up at the end of the year, where regardless of the circumstances or the incumbent's party generally gets a good kicking midterm, and obviously Biden's advantage in Congress is a matter of a few seats, one seat in the Senate, and it seems inevitable that there'll be a Republican majority in both, and it's what they do with that. And even people like Kevin McCarthy talking about impeaching Biden and going back over all of that kind of thing, that causes me a lot of concern. So I think a lot depends on what comes out of the legal proceedings against Trump and his family and his associates. We've seen Ivanka summoned to court or named today. We've seen the Supreme Court open up the archives in the last few days, which is a good sign. I think, with the Conservative majority in the Supreme Court, is that they seem to be holding out against, some of the wilder voices in certainly the House Republicans. So I guess a lot depends on what happens with that, what more comes out of the January 6th inquiries. But I saw an article earlier on today that said it was a silly plot that became deadly serious at the end. We'll see whether that's borne out by some of the evidence.
I mean, I'm always the thing I'm always concerned about in that one, and obviously it depends on what comes out, is it took Donald Trump 2 hours to intervene. That's always been a deep concern of mine, because the evidence was literally there in front of you. Send in the guards, kick them out, which would occur to, I think, any decent person who saw that. With now all of this in mind and everything's going on, irrespective of the criminal any criminal investigations into Donald Trump, how realistic that side do you think it is that he could stand in 2024? That's to both of you, by the way.
Well, if you'll allow me, I think a lot of it has to do with sort of the position or the posture that Biden's in right now. The notion that we're reviewing Biden's first year, it can't be ignored that his polling at the moment is rock bottom. I mean, for a guy who's had, not the controversies of Trump and not been as sort of strident as, say, Obama was with a particular policy agenda, his polling is ridiculously low. I mean, he's at 33% by one account, and Kamala Harris is even worse.
What is the issue with Kamala Harris? Is she just generally unpopular, or have there been specific issues?
I think we need to sort of popularity is always a component of national politics.
Yeah.
But if we look at her generally, I think she was a poor choice, one that was dictated in part by some of the coalition that Democrats have today. And here's a candidate that didn't bring one delegate, not one, to the Democratic National Convention. This is a big state senator, has fundraising advantages over much of the other participants in the Democratic field, and couldn't win one state, couldn't win any delegates from those states that apportion them based on a vote spread, as opposed to granting the whole state. This was a candidate who was incapable of marshaling the resources necessary to win votes and then go to the convention with delegates. And as vice president, she has repeatedly put her foot in her mouth, making statements that, look, it's like a campaign consultant's dream. Some of the stuff she said, you just pull it up and replay it. You don't have to say anything bad about it. It's just run 30 seconds of inane sort of stringing quotes together or stringing lines together that don't have any sort of consequential value, and add a tag at the beginning, a tag at the end, and it sells itself. So I see no way Kamala can become president. Whether she becomes the Democratic nominee in 2024 or not, it's immaterial. And I see a looming fight between Camp Buttigieg and Camp Harris, with Biden perhaps having to be the de facto nominee again, despite being, let's just say, perhaps a little past his sell-by date.
He did say, I'm sure he said that he wasn't going to run in 2024.
He may well have, but again, if you have polling, or if you have conflict point that convinces the institutional Democrats that they can't win with either of the current juniors, they may well feel compelled to go with Biden. And make no mistake, the institutional Democrats, the consulting class that are aligned with all of these potential candidates, don't want to give up a lucrative payday. And let's face it, a presidential election is a very, very lucrative payday.
Warren, how do you see it all?
Well, to go back to the question of whether Trump runs, I think there's probably three factors. One, the sort of legal aspects. Before we get to that stage, is he ruled out through some kind of legal obstacle, conviction, scandal, all of those kind of things. Two, I think it depends on who are his potential rivals for the Republican nomination. And you look at the field, and it looks pretty thin, I think. I mean, is it going to be DeSantis or Cruz, or who else is out there who isn't kind of just a pale imitation of Trump's kind of larger than life persona and fairly extreme policies. But I think three is the Republican membership, and you can see the kind of hold that sort of Trumpian membership base holds on some of the senators and Congress people, in that quite often you kind of get the feeling that they're not 100% bought into the Trump agenda, but that they have to go along with it, because if they don't, and we've seen that with Cheney and others, any kind of dissent to it and they're out. So unless they're sort of a retiring senator who's got nothing to lose, they tend to go along with it, which I think is an indicator of the hold that they have. I think, it does depend on who Trump, if he's not disbarred from office, who he thinks he's going to be running against. I think Biden left it fairly open when he stood 3 years ago as to whether he would seek 2 terms. I think his intention was probably 1, reading between the lines, but in recent days he said he will run again, and he said that Kamala Harris will be his running mate again. Will the Democrats let him run if they don't think he can win, and if they think he'll lose against Trump? I think a lot depends on does his polling remain this bad? I was looking at his approval disapproval today. 43% approve, 56 disapprove, 40 58, 43 49. It is bad, and it's inexplicable really in terms of the first year he's had in terms of economic performance. Legislatively, it's been terrible because of Manchin and Sinema and the sort of obstruction he's had in Congress. But there have been worse first years for presidents. So I think get through the next 6 months, see whether he can get bits of Build Back Better through, see what happens in the midterms, whether it's a disaster or just bad. I think decisions made then.
If I might add, Warren, I have only one sort of substantive disagreement with you, and that is, while yes, Biden himself has been relatively milquetoast, he has failed to fulfill a major promise of his campaign, which was let's return to normal. Let's go back to normalcy, a relatively conservative sort of promise. And in fact, the world in the US isn't normal, with record inflation rates, with the continuing sort of COVID response that includes masks and closures, et cetera. I don't think the fundamental thing he promised, forget the nuances of particular policy, but the thing he promised of let's go back to normal hasn't happened. And I think that's hurt him as much as anything. We can drill into, what happened in Afghanistan and other things that, I can be persuaded that those aren't entirely, those can't entirely be laid at his feet, despite what some of my Republican friends will say. Nevertheless, on the macro thing he was selling, they haven't delivered. And whether that's his fault or not is immaterial. It ends up sort of accruing to his account. To the point around Trump, I'm convinced Trump is running. Your points around whether there's a legal obstacle to him actually filing and actually being a candidate is legit. I have no quibbles with that, but he is running. Anecdotally, we hear reports around the country of Trump dialing into, small county Lincoln Day dinners with 70 people in the room to dial in and talk to them and, wish them successful fundraising and blah, blah. You don't do that sort of activity if you don't have expectations to run. And certainly the Trump committees are still up and raising money. So it will surprise me greatly if he's not a serious candidate, and in fact, if he's not ultimately the nominee. To your point, DeSantis or Nikki Haley. I think a dark horse out there is probably Sarah Sanders Huckabee, assuming she wins her gubernatorial race in Arkansas. But breaking through the Trump name ID will be difficult. I think Republicans are enamored with name ID above almost anything else. As you look historically, sort of the last man standing gets the nomination. This is certainly Nixon, it's Reagan, it's Bush 41, Bush 43 through the coattails of his father. And this is something that Jeb Bush's team fundamentally missed in the 2016 election cycle.
What
just
they
taking
missed
for
the fact that
granted
is it that the Jeb Bush campaign fundamentally missed that his biggest asset was that he was a Bush?
No, the Jeb Bush campaign fundamentally missed the value of name ID for Donald Trump, and that no one else in the field was competitive with these two brands. Let's not even call them people in this. The two brands of Trump and Bush had basically maximum sort of name ID. No one else came close. So when Team Bush was spending $30 million to grind an axe with Marco Rubio in paid advertising while never touching Trump, what were they thinking? You've got to define the only other guy with brand recognition on par with your own. You've got to define him in a way that clearly prejudices the public against him. And it's, looking at the Bush family history and their ability to sort of knife their opponents incredibly effectively, they completely fell on their face, given that it was Billy Bush in the bus with Donald Trump when he talked about grab her by the you-know-what. The Bush team should have had that. They should have used that, cover Billy, get him a hedge fund job or whatnot. But they could have strangled the Trump ugly baby in its bed the day after if they had dropped that and used that effectively as Trump was launching his campaign.
I mean, it's easy for a family dynasty with a record of success to drop the ball on things. I mean, let's not forget that a week before Bobby Kennedy was killed, he had lost Oregon. And that was, unheard of until then for a Kennedy to lose an election. Now it's a bit more commonplace, although there are extenuating reasons perhaps for that. So the Bush family kind of starting to slip a bit, I think could happen in almost any circumstance. So that could be down to the
certainly 41's team of professionals didn't all transfer over, and in fact many of them had passed on by the time Jeb was.
I find it quite ironic that America has dynastic political families, when they rejected the concept of monarchy, and actually we don't have. Well, we have
sort of. But it
doesn't
pass.
The Benns, but none of them have been prime minister. Well, yeah, there's the Churchills, and the Benns have been a dynastic family on the left, but none of them have been prime minister.
Actually,
let's face it. At the end of the day, the U.S. only has two examples of dynastic leadership, and that's the Adams family, and that's the Bushes. And in fact, when confronted with the notion of a third Bush, the country said, "Oh hell no." Which I think this
Not
is
a monarchy, yeah.
All the angst around Donald Trump. He did achieve one seminally important thing, which was he gave America an opportunity to extend the middle finger to the elite establishment on both the Democrat and Republican Party sides, because what middle America has received as a matter of policymaking for the last 20 years is broken, doesn't work. It's not meeting the needs of a sufficient number of people. Was Trump a viable alternative in terms of advancing policy? Well, no, that's obvious. But in terms of gifting both the right and the left and some of the center the ability to say, we're not doing this anymore, Trump was effective at that. Now, I personally think his
Joshua,
he's frozen.
Doesn't think that at this point. He's forbidding him from running. I think he's on the podium on January 20th of 2025.
I mean, you say about how he kind of broke dynasty. I mean, the way things are going, it's very likely that Donald Trump Jr. or Ivanka Trump would one day run for for office.
How old is
But
Donald Trump?
Well, they may run for office, but so will Chelsea. I don't see either of these young people ever standing for and being elected president.
I'm sort of tempted on that tip about Huckabee Sanders being an outside candidate for the Republican nomination if Trump isn't eligible. I think a matchup between her and Stacey Abrams, if she's successful in Georgia, that might be a huge bet to place and win big on if it comes off. But yeah, interesting candidate.
yeah, one thing I want to touch on, I'm going to throw a challenge to you both. I don't think it's that much of a challenge, but it's an amusing one. Warren, could you tell me where you've been disappointed by Joe Biden in his first year? And Joshua, can you tell me where you actually find things to admire and support about Joe Biden in his first year? Let's go first.
I think I would. I mean, there's a lot of policy stuff that I think I and probably a lot of the Democrats would want him to have done. But I think given the scope he's got in Congress, that's understandable. I think Merrick Garland has been a bit soft and a bit slow on Trump. Now that may be to kind of let the whole thing build up and run through the various lower courts and the civil cases to build, and then strike when the time's right. But yeah, I think obviously if there is a case there against Trump to be prosecuted, then Garland should probably have kicked that off sooner rather than later. But yeah, Biden is a creature of Congress, as he often says, and he's failed even to get Manchin and Sinema on his own team to look at the big picture and go, come on, for the good of the country, if not for the Democrat Party, let's get this through. And he's failed on that, certainly on the big ticket items like Build Back Better.
Okay, and Joshua, where do you find you're supportive of Biden in his first year?
So the thing that I liked most about Biden in the beginning and even currently is the fact that he's kind of not Trump, that he's not tweeting every single day, that he's not saying some inane thing that causes everybody and his brother to scratch their head and wonder what's going on. I'm less moved. I'm less concerned with Biden around domestic policy. And while I'm sort of steering outside the parameters you granted, I have been disappointed, not upset. This is not a partisan thing, but I've been disappointed about his inability of his team to execute on what I think are some low-hanging fruit issues in terms of foreign policy. There's been some real balls dropped there. But on domestic policy, he has a challenge of corralling the legislature. To Warren's point, a couple of senators in sort of right-leaning states that happen to be Democrats not able to fully commit to what Biden's talking about or the procedural tactics required to get them passed.
What do you think is going on there with Sinema and Manchin? Is it that basically the Republicans have just been better at working with them, or is it that their fear of the midterms? What is on earth going on there? Why are they seeming to vote against the Democrats on pretty much everything?
Oh, I mean, where are the incentives? There's a couple incentive points you have to consider. One, they happen to be in states that outside of their respective brands or particular wins would normally vote with a Republican.
Yeah.
So for them to become the heel, so to speak, in their home states risks their ability to get reelected. And what does every politician want more than anything else? It's to be reelected at the next election. In addition to that, years ago, I used to think that Robert Reich was a bit on the wacky side, but increasingly I buy into some of his rhetoric around the bifurcation of American society, where a handful of very, very wealthy individuals are basically owning access to top tier educational institutions, our political processes, regulatory processes, etc. And so to that end, make no mistake, there are some very, very big, deep pockets that would incentivize through carrots and sticks these two senators who can point to their electoral environments as reasons for why they're voting the way they are to vote the way they have. I mean, come on, there's big money involved. And I suspect that whether it's on filibuster question or whether on actually passing certain legislation, that some deep pocketed special interests have more or less made it plain, we'll give to you in this context. We will absolutely take you down in the next election cycle in another context. And remember, success or failure in most competitive US elections, whether in the primary or the general, is usually less than 3%.
Well,
$1 million in either West Virginia or Arizona could likely move what's needed to alter an outcome either in a primary or a general.
yes.
But
And there's apparently there's 400 million. There's 400 people in America worth over $1 billion. So a few $1 million here or there to play the game. And sorry, shouldn't be funny, but it is.
So why wouldn't they cross the floor and join the Republicans?
Because that creates other risks, right? Go ahead, Warren. I'm sorry, I've talked a lot.
I was just speculating. Really, is it their ego? I mean, they are neither, outstanding parliamentarians as such. They are the centre of the national narrative and political debate because they hold the balance of power. And were they to join the Republicans, I guess they would just be two amongst 50, 51, 52. So why give that up?
I mean, the other thing I also want to touch on is you were both talking about the possibility of Biden running for re-election. Until very recently, like I say just about everyone else, but like many people, I took it for granted that he was going to be a one-term president. He was going to stand down in 2024 and enjoy what years he had left. If Biden runs again, I mean, from the word go, from the moment the Chief Justice said, "Congratulations, Mr. President," a year ago today, Joe Biden is the oldest serving president in US history, right from the word go. I don't think even Reagan had that because Eisenhower beat him by a few months when Reagan first took office. But if he runs for a second term in 2 years' time, he will be 82 years old, which means that if he runs the full term and he's in good health, etc., when he leaves office, he will be in his just making sure I got the maths right, 87th year. His 87th year. Very few presidents have, I mean, even allowing for changes in modern medicine and everything else, very few US presidents have reached 87, let alone sat in office.
I do find.
So how realistic is it? On that basis, I mean, surely it will be, he's too old. He'll be too old.
A matter of months. Is he different to Trump, or is Trump a year?
Matter of months. He's slightly older than Trump, but only by, I don't know whether by a month or at least.
So if Trump gets
no, he's 4 years older than Trump. He's 4 years older than Trump. I apologize. I was confused because Trump is very slightly older than Bush Jr., who's very slightly older than Clinton. George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump were born in 1946. Biden's 4 years older than Trump. So the only surviving US president who's older than Joe Biden is Jimmy Carter, who will be 98 this October if he's still alive then.
I do find that a lot of US, there seems to be a lot of American politicians with the elixir of eternal youth. When I was a kid, I always used to be stunned by Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan was only was older than two of my grandparents and was only like 3 years younger than my granny. And honestly, like, he looked young enough to be her son. I know that he was an actor, and he probably like had
a wealthy lifestyle. Does help.
Wealthy lifestyle, probably like false hair, dyed hair, probably, I don't know, whatever money can buy to knock 20 years off you. But like, it does stun me how long they seem to be able to go on for.
You've just reminded me of one of Ronald Reagan's first big political set pieces was when he took part in a CBS debate called Town Hall of the World, where he represented the Republicans, and of all people, Bobby Kennedy represented the Democrats, debating students and some overseas from America in London, and it was over Vietnam and stuff like that. It's fascinating because it's the first, if you look, easy to find on YouTube, but it's the only time you see Bobby Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, who I don't think ever met face to face, clash in their respective TV studios. And it's fascinating. They didn't so much clash with each other as with the students. But I'm reminded of this just now because Ronald Reagan said at one point, as the oldest person in the room, and he was 56 in his 56th year. So there probably is something to tell you. But I mean, it's not, I mean, there is a sort of, society does put a limit on age. I mean, they will let people be in office in their 60s and 70s, very rarely, unless they're a monarch or a dictator, are they allowed to go far into their 80s. I mean, the Queen's the exception at 95 because she's the Queen. And I think she does, I suspect she does even less than she used to.
Yeah.
Is it the scale of politics? I mean, MPs here represent relatively small areas compared to, say, a US senator. And, they are still expected to get out on the doorstep every weekend and, rain or shine, trump up and down the steps and bang on doors. And they don't have huge staffs. The money isn't there to employ a lot of people. I don't know how. I'm assuming that a US senator would have quite a big staff. So is there that workload, that pressure, that physical draining thing on some of those older US politicians that you do get 80-year-old MPs over here, but there's not a lot of them. The average age for an MP is now in the sort of early 50s. I can't really imagine doing it myself, and I'm 55 this year. I think it's incredible that you've got some people well into their 70s doing it in the States, but I guess there may not be that kind of weekly grind that British politicians have.
Well, so I'll add some insight here. I think that a good deal of this is form that's followed function, and the degree to which money drives US politics and has done so to the extent that it has. And money's always been there, but to the degree that it is, there is a relationship between the 1970 change in policy that opened the legislative committees to where you had big business then tracking literally every single vote, the sort of pay to play, which wouldn't have been possible because no one knew exactly how members were voting, suddenly became part of the process. And so these establishment members who've been around for 30 or 40 years have deep connections with the special interests, and the special interests have no incentive for change if it's working. And so keep these old folks around. The seniority process in the two chambers grants only those who've been there 30 plus years access to the most senior posts. And in the absence of reform, either on the campaign finance side or on the legislative rulemaking side around who can have what posts when in their tenure, I don't think we're going to see a radical change to this. Add on top of that, the baby boom generation, which is still the largest voting bloc, and they sort of look in the mirror and see somebody like Joe Biden is, well, that guy's my age. He's still young, right? I'm young. Yeah, not so much, but I mean, it's sort of the self-delusion that a big enough percentage of the society is able to engage in. And so you can have a guy like Donald Trump or Joe Biden as sort of the leader of the country, because it hasn't moved on to the Gen Z cohort or the Gen X or Gen Z and all the sort of subsequent cohorts, which will be larger over time, but because baby boom still is the largest voting bloc based on age and then propensity to show up.
I mean, there's merit in what you say, especially on the sort of link with age. But I'm 46, which is a mere stripling compared to the ages we're talking about here. But I'm in a job which requires 3 days a week to wake up very early in the morning. I've never fully got used to that. So the thought of, and this could easily happen, a president well into his 80s having to deal with a very difficult, complex, say, for example, I mean, in the next few days, Russia could invade Ukraine.
And it happens at 3 o'clock in the morning. And
in
so
the US,
wake up...
Washington, it happens at about 3 a.m. Washington time. Joe Biden's woken up. He now has to make very quick fire decisions when he's probably had about 4 and a half hours sleep. When your brain is not fully, even with a huge mug of coffee, your brain is perhaps not fully functioning as it should be.
I think we are
Well, you're being logical. There's no logic to politics. You're being logical.
But I'm saying this.
You're absolutely right. But if Biden ends up as the nominee again, it will not be because it's logical or smart. It'll be because select interests don't see an alternative path or a better path or a way to make money. And so they'll push it forward because they can, not because they should.
There is that. But
yeah,
I'm just saying, if I have these concerns as a 46-year-old, I'm sure there are some people out there who are elderly thinking, I'm not sure I would want to go through that. So why should I expect someone else?
Bear in mind, I mean, like presidents, being president or even prime minister is a huge job. It is not a 9-to-5 job. It's a 24/7 job. It's hugely stressful. And, there's often pictures of, even Barack Obama, who definitely has an elixir of eternal youth. Like if you see a picture at the beginning of his 8 years and then you look at one at the end, he looks like he's aged 20 years. Yeah. And, it happened with Clinton. You do it with anybody. And Blair as well. Like, so you see that like the massive acceleration in aging when somebody is in that leadership position. The flip side is I've often been stunned when I've seen people that I know who either lost their seat or stepped down from Parliament seem to then get younger in the next 5 years. I've seen it with so many people. So many people just get younger,
Right.
You've mentioned Ukraine, and I was going to bring that up. And we've talked about Jimmy Carter and thinking of another single term, effectively US president in Lyndon Johnson and the impact that Vietnam had on him. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that he was particularly old when he died. Only 2 years after leaving office.
It was 4 years to the day, or right. 4 years and 2 days.
I know
4 years and 2 days after he stood down.
He had a heart issue, but he was wrecked by Vietnam. And if there's a long and protracted and bloody conflict in Ukraine that spills over into other parts of Eastern Europe, maybe worse, and I don't think you can underestimate the impact that would have on Biden, and I think that would increase the likelihood that he's a single-term president.
At risk of steering off of our course, it won't just be Ukraine. There are also troops reportedly being placed in Belarus along the border with Lithuania and Poland. The provocations are increasing, and to Warren's point, I don't think if a full-scale conflict breaks out, that it will be contained simply to the border with Ukraine.
No. One thing I will say about Joe Biden and the US administration. They're tough on, they at the very least talk tough on Putin and Russia, if not are tough, and especially compared to the previous administration. I think that at this time we do need, irrespective of Democrat or Republican, we do need to see a tough talking US president on this. And I think that's
but
what
we also
have.
needs to be somebody that will follow through. I think you can't just talk tough.
Oh yes,
if you threaten
that
to
goes.
the trouble is you have, if you make a threat and then you have to follow through on that threat, otherwise you lose credibility.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but that testing is yet to happen. But saying at the moment, what is needed is for Putin to be told bluntly and in no uncertain terms, you set one foot into Ukraine and Russia will face a host of economic sanctions and other problems that you'll wish they never had.
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I can tell you I have a host of foreign policy hawks, Republicans that crossed over and voted for Biden, Democrats that started and stayed with Biden, who are very, very upset with this administration's handling of issues related to security. So I'm sort of indirectly disagreeing with your point earlier, Paul, about the administration being effective in its engagement with Russia, but I don't really wish to go a lot further there.
This is please crave my indulgence, because I actually went to Belarus when I was a teenager on tour with the Northamptonshire Youth Orchestra. It was a very interesting experience because it was not long after the Iron Curtain fell down, and we were the first kind of youth group of our kind to go over there, and it was kind of it was an interesting experience.
Was Lukashenko president yet then? Or?
I don't know, but it was still like under the shadow of communism, and you could feel it. And Belarus is somewhere that had basically been flattened in every war ever. So it's very well. There's two things are really striking. First of all, like very little pre-Second World War architecture remains. Secondly, like the huge communist statue things were like everywhere. And also like there was no, at that point, I don't know whether it's changed, but there was no sign of capitalism, any growth of economic, it was still, there was a cloud there. And
what year was this, Rachel?
1994.
Okay.
So very soon, I don't know when,
year Lukashenko became president.
There was one interesting incident involving some of the students going out and getting vodka, but we won't go there. But yeah, I think that, and I can also see how it can, because of that, because it was somewhere that was so under that cloud, more than like the other extreme is the Czech Republic, that if you go there now, doesn't even look like it was ever communist. I can see how it was a place that could raise up further authoritarian leaders, because it was quite a sad place. And there was huge tower blocks, very grim grey tower blocks that literally everybody lived in. There was no suburbs. There was no, there was no middle class. It was quite sad, really.
My sister, and again, I crave your indulgence there, because just mind me, and it's just a sentence or two here. My sister once visited Berlin, but as in the whole of it, not just the former East. And she said you could see the shadows of Nazism and communism on that part of the city, because it hadn't known democracy for literally decades. But yes, Biden and foreign policy. Where do you see 2022 with Biden? As things stand at the moment? That's both of you, by the way.
I think there's so many unknown. I think making predictions is very difficult. Let's say that Trump gets hauled in front of a grand jury or whatever the legal process is, that the Supreme Court don't step in and save his skin. What's the reaction to that from these sort of armed groups, the Proud Boys and some of the others? What happens with Ukraine? What happens with COVID? Does it, if the sort of Omicron wave disappears as quickly as it has in South Africa, is there a political benefit for that for Biden ahead of the midterms that makes it not as disastrous as people are expecting? This is not the kind of normality, Josh, as you were saying. This is not normal times, and I think that perhaps some of the normal rules don't apply. But I'm stuck as to how this will play out.
Joshua?
The window of time to advance a policy agenda is more or less closed. And we're now watching a clock till the November election. Over the next few months, it'll be fairly quiet. Obviously, the noise around the election will start to grow, and by the summertime, it will become, you'll start to see media turning it into a fevered pitch of this and that. If we watch the tea leaves, 26 members of the Democratic caucus in the House have announced retirement. 26.
Is that unusually high?
It's just a big number when we know that there's like less than two hands full. So about 5 or 6 seats that the Democrats have as a majority. So in order to, all you have to win is a handful, and suddenly the Republicans have won the majority, and a new speaker comes in. If you have 26 resignations, certainly some of these will then have competitive races. Others will have races that flip Republican because the tenured member had been there so long that they were sort of grandfathered in, and then there'll be other races across the caucus which weren't competitive 2 years ago, which will suddenly be competitive. It won't surprise me with that sort of number of retirements. It won't surprise me at all if there's a 25 to 40 seat majority for Republicans come January or November, the day after the Tuesday. And then seated in January. It won't surprise me at all if the Republicans have a 25 to 40 seat majority.
Are you saying that, like, in the next 6 months, that like any legislation that a president is likely to get through he would have got through in his first 12 months, and the next 6 months nothing will really happen?
Well, I mean, if you're a member in the House or the Senate, this is the period in which you're going to have the most scrutiny. So if you're doing something controversial, the highest risk is now, and consistently the Biden agenda has been thwarted by a couple of senators. So at the very best, they're going to pass some marginal items that have support from both Republicans and Democrats, and I just don't see anything major happening because we're going to sort of it's sort of winding down the clock, so to speak, until the November election is my take on matters. To your point, Warren, absolutely lots of water to go under the bridge. There's the great thing about the future is that the one constant thing in politics is change. So any number of things can pop up on the event horizon, but in the macro based on sort of past performance, we're watching the clock run out until November.
I agree. I don't think there's any circumstance, barring a major political earthquake, that sees the Democrats retain either House or Senate. Even if Trump's pulled off in chains, even if COVID disappears, even if Biden sees off Putin over the Ukraine, it's not going to happen.
Ooh, a lot to mull over then. You were about to say?
One thing I had hope about with Biden, and this is me being biased, right? Because my mum's from Derry, is I thought he might be really helpful with the whole Ireland, Brexit, Northern Ireland thing, I thought that he might be in a position to put Boris Johnson in his place over the protocol, but that doesn't seem to have happened. And I know that he plays up being Irish, like every American whose relative went over in 1847, is apparently as Irish as anyone from Derry. My mother once got into an argument with an Irish American over who was more Irish, which was quite funny. Of course, my mother was the wrong kind of Irish because she was Protestant, but never mind, that was another story. But yeah, I really thought that he would make some sort of great Clintonian intervention on that, and we might be able to sort Northern Ireland, but he hasn't really.
That might be because you need a lot of cooperation from the British government of the day. And Clinton got that on Northern Ireland from both Conservative and then Labour governments, because there was after nearly 30 years of the Troubles, there was a real strong desire to.
Yeah, there was cross-party support, whereas now, over
Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol, for want of a better phrase, the government's playing silly buggers.
They are playing silly buggers, and also they're playing on the fact that most people who live in England don't care about Northern Ireland. But that's the way it is, because like a very small minority of the British population live in Northern Ireland. So if you don't live in Northern Ireland, you probably haven't been there and you don't really understand the issue. So
Clinton was in his second term though, and secure till the end, looking for a legacy, something that didn't involve, well, let's not go there, as his legacy, and Northern Ireland was an easy way of, well, not an easy way, but one way of getting a good foreign policy legacy. I think if Biden were in his second term, things might be different.
Yes, it's still, I suppose. I mean, if Biden does a second term, I mean, my concerns to be him being head of state and head of government. If the US Constitution was different, we're just talking about a head of state like the Irish presidency, I would have less concern. I mean, Eamon de Valera seemed to be doing a good job as president of Ireland into his 91st year. So, it's more the combination of the role. But, yeah. Thank you very much for your contributions. I can see the clock has gone over 9 o'clock, so we've been at this for about an hour now, irrespective of the false start. And again, to those watching, I do apologise. And there was a series of problems happening all at once.
That's all right. We got through in the end. But thank you for your contributions. And as Hal Macmillan once said about politics, it's events, dear boy, events. And but events, not parties.
Not parties. But
what do you mean? I thought this was a work event.
Yes.
See, we're training Joshua that if he's ever at a meeting with British colleagues, he needs to crack a joke about parties.
Yes. But I mean, the one thing that is constant in politics is that we don't know for sure how things will be in 12 months' time. So, hopefully things will be better, but how? One doesn't know. So with that in mind, I hope you all have a good week and a good rest of the evening.
All right.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.